Here we go. A porn star, a Playboy playmate, a former fixer who's flipped, a couple of accountants, and an ex-president walk into a bar. What do you get? What just might be the trial of the century. NBC News has obtained the list of potential witnesses for Donald Trump's hush money trial set to commence in just 4 days. It includes Stormy Daniels, the porn star at the heart of the case, who was paid $130,000 to stay silent about her affair with Donald Trump in the weeks before the 2016 presidential election. Karen McDougal, the Playboy playmate, who was also paid to keep mum about her affair with the ex-president. David Pecker's back. He's the former CEO of the company that owned the National Enquirer. He spearheaded the so-called catch and kill scheme that was designed to suppress stories that made Donald Trump look bad. Prosecutors say he agreed to act as the, quote, eyes and ears of the 2016 Trump presidential campaign. And then, of course, there's Michael Cohen, whose payments to Stormy Daniels were allegedly concealed as legal expenses 34 different times, constituting 34 felony counts. The New York Times says that District Attorney Alvin Bragg sees him as a, quote, tour guide to the entire case. And then there's Hope Hicks, a Trump aide who Cohen says was involved in negotiating the hush money payments. So that's the prosecution's list. On the defense side, at least 2 potential witnesses showing up there today. One of them is the ex-president himself. Trump has often said he's willing to testify anywhere, anytime in any of the cases he's faced over the years. Whether he actually testifies remains to be seen. But whether or not the ex-president takes the stand, what we do know is that he is desperate to prevent this trial from ever starting. On Wednesday, he was handed his 3rd legal defeat this week alone. Of that, the New York Times reports this, quote, nearly a dozen legal experts contacted for this article strained to recall any other defendant, filing 3 emergency appeals in 3 days. Most called it unprecedented. One called it, quote, silliness. We are also waiting this week to hear from Judge Juan Merchan on Trump's request that the judge recuse himself from the case. It's expected to be another loss for Team Trump. As the Time reports, quote, ethics experts have said that Justice Merchan does not need to step aside. And the judge has previously declined to recuse himself, noting that a judicial ethics panel concluded last year that he had no real conflict. The losses piling up for Trump as his first criminal trial takes shape is where we begin today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Former U.S. Attorney and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Harry Litman is here. With me at the table, New York Times investigative reporter Suzanne Craig is back. Senior Executive Editor at Bloomberg Opinion and MSNBC political analyst Tim O'Brien's here. And New York Times editorial board member, MSNBC political analyst who's been up since the Morning Joe shift, Mara Gay, is at the table with us. Sue Craig, I start with you. I've always been a fan of yours and I've followed all your reporting because these facts I find them they're the Trumpiest crimes that we have covered since he exploded onto the scene. And the characters I think there are some people in our industries that have an aversion to this case and these facts because of the sordid nature of them. I don't know what it says about me that I do not. But I think that this is so obvious that watching the story, and again, we have no idea what the jurors will decide. Nobody has any idea if Trump will be found guilty of any of this. But the story that will be told is about sex with a porn star and a fixer who Michael Cohen, whatever you think of him, he's like got a central casting. He was Trump's fixer, paid off the porn star, kept it quiet in the tenuous days after the Access Hollywood tape. Just take us back in time.
Well, the other thing that really stands out to me in this, and it's the National Enquirer piece of it. I mean, maybe
right,
it's
I'm skipping.
Of an age where I used to go to the supermarket with my mom and
yes.
the National Enquirer.
Mom, can we get that alien impregnates Elvis Presley?
You always sort of heard they paid for stories, and in this case, they didn't pay for a story. You know, normally in journalism, how it works is people come to you, the New York Times or wherever, with a story and they say, are you interested? It's either yes or no, but no money is exchanged. And you hear the National Enquirer was one of these tabloids that paid for stories. So if somebody like Stormy Daniels came to them and she said, I've got a sensational story, but I want 100,000 or 200,000, they would pay for it. But in this case, she did that, and They paid to kill it. And that's sort of the third iteration. And I think David Pecker is going to be a really important witness in this. We keep hearing, Michael Cohen, Michael Cohen, Michael Cohen, and he is going to be a narrator for the government. There's no question about that. But people like David Pecker are going to come in, and they're going to have had conversations with Michael Cohen. And in one instance, and Karen McDougal has been mentioned, she's going to be a witness. She is the playmate that has said she had a long-term, I think months long, it could have been longer, affair with Donald Trump. In that case, AMI actually made a payment to keep her silent. They bought her story, and in exchange for the money, they agreed to run 2 articles by her. And as part of her agreement, then she agreed not to talk about anything that she ever had to do with Donald Trump. And in David Pecker's case, he's actually paid a fine to the Federal Elections Commission for his role in that, for election interference. So he's going to be a very interesting witness, but it's much larger than just Michael Cohen's role in this. There were other people, and David Pecker had sort of agreed at the outset that he was going to be the eyes and ears of the campaign. Anything incoming to the National Enquirer would be relayed to Michael Cohen and then Donald Trump. And that's going to be, I think, a big piece of this case as we move forward.
Remind me the role that Hope Hicks played.
Hope Hicks, back in 2016, was one of Donald Trump's closest advisors, and also not just closest, but there weren't a lot of people there. I remember back in 2016 when he was running and I would need to get a hold of him. Hope Hicks was always the go-between. She was in most meetings. So she's going to have seen some of this, and I think will testify to what she saw. But she's going to have been in the room during some of this.
So my brain has been forced to compartmentalize in the era of Trump. And part of my brain, and Hope Hicks's texts after January 6th were made public, I believe, as part of the January 6th Select Committee investigation. And she bemoans that, well, they're all trying to move on with their life because Trump lost. They're all going to be viewed as terrorists. So there's like a sliver of my brain that thinks that some of these people who are trying to move on are now going to be witnesses in a criminal trial about Trump's payments to a porn star through the National Enquirer. And the other is it couldn't happen to a better lot. What do you make of sort of the band coming back together next week in New York?
Well, you can never really move on from Donald Trump. And I think that's the hard lesson. Reporters can't either, as Sue, we can all attest to. It's this sort of poisoned, trashy ecosystem. And the people who gravitate towards it in his direct circle, I think he has an eye for people who are marks for being persuaded to exist in his orbit and carry out his bidding. And since he became president, the consequences of everything that he did were larger. So there's this long tail of people looking at things he's done in the past and trying to hold him accountable in the present. And so anyone who existed in the choir in the past has to sing again. And in a way, I feel, that's a comeuppance. They actually should have to go through this because what he did was consequential. I think what's interesting to me about the energy around this week and last week as well, and these repeated efforts to delay the case, is he is fundamentally scared of something here in a way that, the bravado he used to have when he moved through the New York courts. And this is a cosmic and epic New York moment, right? It has every seedy and interesting part of New York in full display with one of the most, like the crypt keeper of New York crazy Donald Trump being put on trial. And I think it's the least consequential easily of the criminal trials he faces. And given that his histrionics and performance art during the New York State Attorney General's case did not serve him well, the idea that he could use this case as campaign fodder, I think it's dawning on him that he has something really deep to lose here. And when there's these various polls saying that Trump voters may not be that affected by this case, of course they won't. But they're not the voters that matter. What matters are moderate and independent voters who are going to be turned off by the facts that are going to be revisited again in this case.
Well, let me just jump in. I mean, this is the only criminal trial he isn't running on. He's running on the facts. What he's charged with at Mar-a-Lago, he's basically running on. He can't see, he talks about the Presidential Records Act. He talks about the things that he had. He talks about
that he believes he was entitled to do.
Correct. And on the insurrection he incited, he starts his rallies with an ode to the jailed insurrectionists who beat cops. So this is the only set of facts that he's charged with criminally that he's running on.
Well, I think that's completely true, but I think what he is running on is I'm a victim just like you. And the system puts me in the crosshairs.
Getting caught paying off a porn star.
But it says I'm a victim. I actually think all of the facts travel beyond the consciousness of his supporters because the leader of their cult is being persecuted and he stands between them and the abyss. And he's essentially being penalized for being their defender. And I think there's nothing swaying his most devoted followers from that point of view. But I think, I am just curious if we're going to see evidence entered in this trial that hasn't been public yet, that he and his lawyers are aware of, that goes well beyond the fact that there's already a tape recording of him saying to Michael Cohen, talk to Alan Weisselberg, my CFO, about arranging this payment. There's a tape here, just like in the Georgia case, that's very incriminating. But I wonder if there's more beyond this that we're not fully aware of that explains this rabid effort to postpone the start of this trial.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.